there's been conversations about, the UK industry having a ceiling, but particularly the rap industry, right? And I've always heard this and I've agreed with it. But I think there's other instances or ways that maybe it's not being looked at, maybe from the artist or just maybe the general supporter that can have that view. Because I thought about it and I thought of the fact that a lot of labels, and if you're talking about from, like I say, industry standpoint and why there's a ceiling within an industry, labels generally are the ones that have created an industry, right? And if you're a label, generally from a business perspective, and this can be in most businesses, it's not just label, you know, pertaining to a label. If you've worked in any environment, if you've worked in most, jobs or any corporate environment, there's certain things that an employee generally has to do in regards to what's required of them, right? There's something required of the employee, required of the employer. And I think a lot of the time that understanding is not being used in the music industry, particularly in the UK rap industry. And I think sometimes artists probably, and I can understand why, but probably artists are not looking at it that most labels and the relationship, if you have to look at it, is similar to that, an employer and employee, where you're in partnership, yes, but it has those sort of tendencies where you're going to have to do certain things that are required as an artist. So you sign a deal, there's certain things that you have to be, liable for, you have to be, obligated to do. Obviously, whether you've got an album deal, however many albums, or single deal, labels want to be able to make money. They want to be able to have a return on their investment. They want to be able to say, okay, this is the artist we invested in. This is how much we invested. I want a return, and then obviously you guys or the artists get their share of what has been made. But I think a lot of the time, rappers, maybe let's just say rappers from the ends, right? Rappers from the road, they will come into the game. They will have their sort of understanding of what they would want to do. Sometimes they would want to portray a certain way, make sure that their image is a certain way, is intact. But I think they don't look at it from a perspective of what are labels thinking. Labels just want an artist to be able to be viable. If I'm coming in as an artist and I'm from the ends, your perception of viability and how you want to go about it will be different potentially. You may say, okay, I'm not looking to do certain things marketing wise because it infringes of, my beliefs or what I've come from, right? I can't be looking crazy out here, for example. I'm not looking to do maybe something in relation to a TikTok sort of way of marketing, and that's fine. And that's not the only way, but that's just an example. So it's one of those ones where I look at it and think there sometimes is an issue or disconnect with artists from, the rap world who come in as rappers, and then obviously labels. Labels don't mind signing rappers. They would want their rappers to be successful, but there is a ceiling in another way to look at it from how sometimes an artist will be, staunch in their views and how they want to portray themselves, which sometimes doesn't get you where you need to be from a financial and commercial level, where labels would want you to be generally. For the most part, I'm talking about the main labels in the UK who have some of the known artists or who have had some of the known rappers over the years. They would want an artist to be able to be free in their creativity, but also bring in the numbers. Because when they're looking at their numbers, they're wanting to see, okay, what have I invested in and what is the potential and where is it going, right? And I think that's been something where artists sometimes don't see that aspect. They're looking at just the creative aspect, which is fine, you have to. But you also have to look at the business side from a label standpoint, particularly if you're saying there's an industry ceiling within rap. Labels want to be able to say, like I say, let's get to the money. Let's get to a commercially viable artist so we can then use his music or her music in different arenas, maybe, maybe for sync licensing, maybe, for, any kind of opportunity. They would want an artist to be viable. Also, I've also thought as well, when it comes to artists yesteryear, for example, So Solid, they were doing what was required for the label, but they had a ceiling based on the fact that they were from the ends and the fact that they had, as part and parcel, sometimes that happens, you would have issues that you come into the game with, right? That is a hindrance as well. Unfortunately, that is a hindrance as well, where you're coming in wanting to do this rap, wanting to make music, or at that time, garage and an MC, and having issues to be able to navigate. You have business issues, then you have also real life issues. And I think sometimes those aspects cause a problem for a ceiling as well, because you may take on an artist that you think has talent, but in the label's eyes, when there's issues that are real outside of the industry, they can be perceived as a liability. So that is an immediate ceiling. So being real, for example, or being about that, it doesn't matter in terms of being able to sell, meaning the image is fine to have if you're from the road, the image, but you don't necessarily need to be that to sell. You just need to have an image that can give you a reminder or a sort of familiarity, right? To be able to say, okay, this is someone that has the look, but doesn't need to be that. Call it fake, call it real or not real, whatever it is. You have to look at it from an industry label standpoint. If again you're signed and you're talking about industry having a ceiling, as long as you've got the portrayal, you've got the music that has that edge, you're good to go generally. And you've got a good, obviously, marketing or whatever, or however you do it. So I think there's ceilings if you want to remain quote unquote real. There's ceilings if you're not looking at it from a label standpoint. If you're doing an independent route, then yeah, come out, have your team, however you're going to assemble them. And obviously everyone's doing what they need to do for you as an artist. But if you're talking about a label and a ceiling in this country, you have to remember UK rap wasn't created by, or rap, I would say, wasn't created by UK people, right? So to be familiar with something, it has to be able to be within the UK environment of how the culture is and how what we are accustomed to in the UK. It has to fit, but also, most importantly, like I said earlier, it has to be able to make money and be viable. And artists should be looking at it from that standpoint. Being viable, are you willing to do what's required sometimes to be viable? If you are, then generally you may be able to navigate. But if you're not, understand that is that is a ceiling. That will be a ceiling where you won't be able to navigate as much as you may want to. So, for example, even if you may see an artist that could be selling in the industry, right? It could be another rapper. You may have a rapper that wants or is open to make collaboration attempts with the artist that's selling, but labels may not be too keen on that because they think there's nothing that you're really bringing to the table to the main artist that sells. So immediately the industry has a ceiling. Immediately the industry is saying you need to have a certain level, you need to have a certain number, you need to be doing a certain amount of sales for you to even be viable to work with that artist. Depending if the artist may have maybe a bit more leeway in the label, and he can say, or she say, yeah, in fact, I want to work with this person based on whatever reason. But that is a ceiling when you try and attempt to work with maybe one of the main artists, but it doesn't work because of the fact that it's politics. Oh, what's the numbers saying? Why reach out to that person who may be as creative as they can be when the numbers are not really where they need to be? Again, it's all about being viable. It's all about bringing in numbers. So artists have to look at it from that perspective. They have to look at it from that label and industry perspective. Because if you sign, you have to have obligations. You have to have obligations. And I think artists, like I say, have not really thought about that enough. Or maybe artists do know and say, you know what? I'm still going to say there's a ceiling, but it doesn't really help much if you keep mentioning it because of the fact that that's the structure. You either are going to be within it, be adaptable, understand what labels generally would want, and move accordingly, or be independent, make as much headway as you can, and then maybe if you gain leverage with what you've managed to do independently, you can have something a bit more favorable in how you maneuver. But yeah, that's some of the things I've looked at. You know, being clear on what it is a label wants is important. Being clear on your objectives so you can know that this is a label that I can work with because maybe it aligns with my sort of mentality or value or how I would want to portray myself. Um, so that's key. I thought, you know, I've seen these conversations over the years, even before online was really a thing. There was always conversations about the UK having a ceiling. Different rappers, and also as when online started becoming a thing, different rappers used to definitely mention, oh yeah, there is a ceiling, but a ceiling can exist for a certain type of artist who, like I said, may not want to conform to what is required to market themselves, may not understand sometimes the label's perspective. It's business, it's business. If you're doing well, before you are signed and you're getting some noise, you're going to be signed more often than not, or you're going to be offered a deal. But you have to bring in what's required. And however you go about doing that is your prerogative. But you still have to deliver. And that is where people have to look at it, fans, artists, because it's similar to working a job. It is very similar. The only difference is obviously you're going to have to pay an advance back, right? But the similarities exist. And that's why I thought I'll speak on it, because me following the game, me knowing, what I've heard from different artists, or just, using your brain, just knowing how general business works, especially if you're in partnership with someone, or you're setting up, your own environment. There has to be things that you're looking to gain and you're looking to see. And once you're in partnership, there's that sort of you give, I give, that kind of relationship where we need to see what's going on. And the numbers is what is important, you know. Even if you are to look at it from an example like even I remember H mentioned, he had a new album, and he mentioned that something to the effect of, people's attention spans are not where they used to be. So he's made an album that kind of corrects that. So it's like music where he can play live performances. So it's like a concept specifically for live performances. And I think that makes sense. I think you have to try and do something that can give you, less of a ceiling, within an industry that has a certain way of moving. You have to try and think of little, ways that you can, you know, garner your fan, cultivate the fan, or cultivate your supporters, and then obviously, be able to fulfill objectives. Because yeah, that's what it is. The labels, artists, if like I say, the connection is to be understood, I think that will help a bit more to understand sometimes why, there is a ceiling in the UK, particularly ceiling in the UK rap scene. But yeah, that's a few of my points that I think, you know, kind of explain from my perspective what I think is part of a ceiling. Yeah, there's an industry, but there's also ways that artists are not looking at it to enable them to then have issues, issues that sometimes they don't, you know, envisage or want, but happens based on the fact that even your musical style has to also be looked at. How can your music infiltrate the charts? What kind of sound are you doing that incorporates something that most people can listen to? Obviously the youth are the people to, really gravitate to certain types of music, but what sound do you have that really garners as much, you know, sales as possible? That's the sort of understanding that artists should be having if they want to be within a label under, a certain type of, you know, requirement that is within these contracts. You need to fulfill these things, bring something that is viable, bring something that we can, use in different arenas. And maybe once artists start thinking like that, if they want to do it or not, then I think a ceiling will only be had if artists decide against doing what's required within the industry. But again, this is not to say what artists should do or shouldn't do. But if you're an artist that is with a label, you're going to have to look at it from that perspective of the business delivering. And then if you're an independent, you have a bit more leeway, but you need to be able to have that financial pull to be able to sustain and try and do as much as you can. But there's other examples where, independent artists have managed to navigate, managed to maybe have a few in industry, ventures or a few partnerships here and there, but you still have to ultimately be able to deliver from a business perspective. So those are the aspects, like I said, that I think have to be looked at, because artists can flourish. It's just that maybe you either look at the industry in a different way, you look at it from the label standpoint, or you go independent and do what you can to a certain level. And then obviously you try and see what leverage you can maybe create from that point. But that's what I think. But what do you think? I think that's key to know as well, because yeah, that's my opinion on it.